Okay, hello everyone. This is part two of the Thailand case study. In part one, we learned about one negative example of maximum government in Thailand, which is under Pibun. Okay, so now we look at the shining star, right, of this Thailand case study, which is Sarit Dhanarat's maximum government. Okay, it's supposed to be a positive example. Okay, so let's find out how come it's positive. Right, so who was he? Okay, so basically, right, Sarit Dhanarat, he was a very traditional military strongman. Okay, he's very localized, right? He didn't really receive an overseas education. Okay, so therefore, a lot of his ideas, a lot of his influences, right, is actually from Thai culture, or definitely religion, or even like monarchy, right? So that's why his ideas, his policies, okay, is definitely very distinctly Thai, right? And he's also a believer in martial values, right? Where maybe like strict discipline, okay, and he might not be so supportive of political conventions, all right. So sometimes he might not be very committed, okay, to democratic processes and elections. Okay, however, okay, in spite of all this, Sarit was generally a positive case study, Sarit's government, okay, and he was able to establish political stability, okay. And one very important thing that he did, right, was that legacy, okay, of Sarit, right, was that he also revived the position of the king, okay, and laid the foundations for private businessmen to enter politics. Okay, so his so-called maximum government started in 1958, right? After he imposed martial law, right, and then he basically took advantage of the instability of the 1957 elections, and he started a coup. Okay, in 1957 already, but then there was like still in some instability, okay, some change of leaders, and finally he managed to consolidate power in 1958. Right, so therefore this suggests that former elections thus failed to provide stability, and instead it actually ironically, all right, gave the military the opportunity to dominate Thai politics. Okay, so therefore once Sarit was in control, again they began to play with the constitution. So I don't know how many times the constitution have changed in Thailand, right? So he started to draft his constitution, but it will only be ready in 1968, okay, after his death. Okay, so he died in 1963. So basically, that's the only reason his regime would end, okay, with his death. All right. So his successor, Tanom, okay, he was also not very popular, but anyway, yeah, it was only ready by 1968. Okay, so you can see how that 10 years in the making. Okay, so well, let's look at this wonderful 10-year in the making constitution. Okay, so therefore there's some kind of political liberalization, right? But then the military was still very much in control. So therefore, this constitution, right, is still very much clearly aimed, all right, at maintaining maximum government, okay, in Thailand, right? Let's look at the signature thing, okay, with regards to Sarit Dhanarat's maximum government, okay, where he tried to align the Thai military, right, with the Thai monarchy, okay. So like for example, okay, so there's this thing that this very important ritual, okay, that uh in Thai politics, whereby there's this swearing of allegiance by the troops to the throne and the flag. Okay, it became a major military occasions under Sarit. So a lot of like pomp and revelry, a lot of such symbolic gestures basically is to reinforce the fact that there's this kind of like magical alliance, okay, between the military and the monarchy, and the military, right, is like trying to derive its legitimacy from the king. Okay, at the same time, okay, Sarit also depended very much on Buddhism, on religion. Okay, so therefore the king, okay, became the royal appointee, the supreme patriarch, okay, became a royal appointee, so became appointed by the king. Okay, and then that's how they managed to control the Buddhist hierarchy. Okay, and he also gave King Bhumibol, the king back then, all right, with the restoration of many royal ceremonies. Okay, so Sarit felt that this is the way for Thai democracy, also called like Thai governance, to flourish. Okay, it needs to be indigenous. Okay, so therefore he developed this national ideology of king, religion, and nation. All right, and under Sarit's leadership, the king was definitely given a greater role both internally and internationally. Right, and then the king was made to became very very prestigious, right, and basically representing the country, and they became very 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 important. Okay, and also this nation, religion, and king, or king, religion, and nation, right, is also very much an ideology whereby the military was also very very dominant. okay, because the military position itself, okay, as the guardian of Thai state ideology. Okay, so therefore this was the key to the military government gaining popular legitimacy, even though there were no elections because it's maximum government, remember, right? So this was Sarit. Okay, so it's actually a very good picture lah to show that how he made use of both the king and religion, and he also made use of, not made use of, benefited, all right, from US economic and political aid at that period of time. Okay, so this would be Sarit, okay, paying allegiance to the king and queen. Okay, so this would be like a typical military march, okay, to commemorate certain royal occasions, right? So this would be the king himself, okay, in a very it's kind of common, not say common lah, but this would be the kind of ceremonies, the kind of rituals that became identified with what the king has to do. Okay, and it was Sarit who actually brought this back, okay, to Thai politics. Okay, and criterion 3, okay, so with regards to the growing influence of the business community, okay, and how it actually became a source of stability. All right, so therefore Sarit, because at that point in time, Thailand was actually flush with like US investments lah. Okay, so that's why a lot of local businessmen, okay, took advantage of this context, okay, this situation to do business, to have a lot of like business opportunities, right? So therefore there was a formation of a lot of like, business conglomerates, okay, and then the private businesses flourish especially a lot of like ethnic Chinese businesses. Okay, so therefore they began to have a lot of like money politics, or a lot of alliances between military leaders and Chinese businessmen. Okay, same as Suharto. All right, remember Suharto's best friends, all right, named also the Chinese, very rich Chinese businessmen. Okay, so same thing. Okay, and then this business community, right, would then become an increasingly important political force. All right, so therefore you can see that this was again another strategy for Sarit to try and retain legitimacy, okay, and therefore maintain stability, okay, by trying to expand its popular base of support. Right, so it was no one can doubt Sarit's government, okay, for its economic achievements. So there are very clear statistics to show that, right? And the military itself, okay, the role was also expanded, right? So therefore the military also involved in business, okay, and at the same time, okay, because there was like general prosperity and all that, right? So therefore we get the usual stuff, okay, like what happened that what happened in Indonesia as well. Okay, so therefore we have like middle class, we have a lot of university students, okay, and then we can see that the political base, all right, as the pie, okay, has become bigger and bigger. Okay, so now we also see the emergence of the middle class and the university students. And so if we think about what happened in Burma, okay, the 8888 uprising, Thailand, the Sarit's government would have cause for concern. Okay, with regards to criterion 1, okay, Thailand definitely they have to face this very serious communist insurgency. I think even till now, right, there are still like pockets of such resistance, right? The Communist Party of Thailand, okay, in the so-called like rural areas of Thailand, okay, and you can see that they were still a force to be reckoned with lah, okay, and kind of still ongoing. So it's not like a very decisively defeated them. Okay, and yet I still say that Sarit's government is a positive example overall, right? So therefore this suggests that maybe criterion 2 and 3, right, they're actually more important indicators okay, than criterion 1. Like you just make sure that the communists don't overthrow you can already. Don't defeat you can already. You can just like try to keep that at bay, at least maintain the status quo, right? Work on your criterion 2 and 3. Okay, you can still remain in power. Okay, so how about more challenges? Okay, so communists have just mentioned, right? So the monarchy, right, also became increasingly important, all right, and it actually provided the moral leadership. So like the king became more and more like a paragon of virtue, all right, like basically totally holy, like pure and all that, all right. The Thai people really, really, really revered this Thai king, King Bhumibol, right? And therefore when you contrast the king, okay, and his image, okay, with so-called Sarit's clique, okay, we might associated with businessmen, ostentatious and probably corrupt and spend a lot of money and all that, westernized. So therefore, it's a huge contrast. Okay. The king also became increasingly involved in politics, and it's actually quite a cool thing. Okay, you will see later on. Right. The king will like, yeah, chastise Thai politicians, say like it's like some discipline master like that, right? And later on in 1973, he will intervene. Okay, there was this massive student protest in 1973, right? And the king played a very important, decisive role, all right, in ending Tan Nom's rule, all right, and then he was on the side of the students. Okay, so basically he let the students win. Okay, and it ended in the resignation of Tan Nom. Okay, another increasing challenge, all right, will be just now as I mentioned, the new societal groups. Okay, so the business class, right, and from the intellectuals, from the students. Okay, so what happens when these four groups join forces? You get something like this again, right? So this is another example of a popular uprising. Okay, and this was the one that overthrew the Tan Nom regime. So I guess it will be the second example that managed to overthrow the existing maximum government. Alright, the outcome will be the 1973 student protest. So therefore, same thing, what are the causes? Alright, then after that, what were the manifestations? So you can see, okay, that like you have students, then you have communist influence, National Student Centre of Thailand, okay, and then you even have members of the public. So therefore, you're talking about like the urban middle class, alright, and then the Thai king actually intervened. Basically, it was quite cool, alright. He opened up the palace, okay, he opened up the royal palace, alright, as a refuge, okay, for these students. Okay, so you can see some, and because of this, right, he forced the resignation of the Sarit successor, okay, Tan Nom. Okay, and there was a short-lived period of democracy. These 3 years, these very precious 3 years, from 73 to 76. Okay, so this would be the 1973 student protest. Okay, you can see that the students themselves, so obviously they're students, right? They look like they're wearing uniform. Okay, they claimed, the right to protest. Okay, by yeah, saying that the king is on their side, perhaps. Okay, so you can see so many of them protesting. The kind of response from the government, obviously the military solution. Okay, and this was actually the students, right, taking refuge in the palace ground. So this was the king's mother, okay, the queen mother, right, and it was like quite important because by opening up the palace grounds, he's basically extending his sacred hand of protection over them. Okay, and then like the military government, right, weren't there to arrest them, or weren't there to like go into the palace to arrest them. Okay, so therefore that marked the very long period of maximum government in Thailand. Okay, there was a very brief return to parliamentary and liberal democracy, but it was so brief that it's not really worth talking about. Okay, this period is only 3 years, but it's actually highly unstable. Okay, so it's like characterized by violence, by conflict, and at the same time, the communist threats also became more and more severe, okay, more and more serious. Okay, so what happened? Political parties, left, right, center, began to emerge, okay, as what usually you observe in a democratic setting, right? Okay, you have a coalition government after the 1975 elections. So this was like a democratic election, a free and fair one. Okay, but then there's a coalition government, so it's like there's no consensus, there's no unity. Okay, so it's like the 1955 elections in Indonesia kind of thing, right? And so there was no coordination. In fact, there are actually 3 mini governments. So how can you rule a country with that? Okay, and then there was a military put pressure on them because the military is still around, and election was called again. Okay, because this is untenable, right? You cannot have like 3 mini governments, right? And then there was another elections, and then another person became the prime minister. So it's highly unstable. Okay, so therefore by 1976, the king decided that he became supportive of the military again because he felt that open politics, as what was observed from 73 to 76, right, was very unstable, and it actually undermined the stability of the country, and definitely the role of the monarchy as well, the position of the monarchy as well. Okay, so that's why in 1976, with support of the king, okay, military units seized power from the civilian Senai government. Okay, therefore, after only 3 years, Thailand returned to military dominance. All right, and then General Prem, okay, became the next leader, the next ruler, prime minister of Thailand. General Prem is a strong ally, okay, of the king. Okay, so he was also one of the most loyal supporters of the king. Eventually, after he stepped down as prime minister, right, he would be part of like the Privy Council, where it's like a council of advisors, all right, taking charge of the affairs of the king. Okay, so you can actually see that the strong relationship between this General Prem and King Bhumibol. Right, so therefore, we look at the next period. So after 1976, so when they went back to maximum government, they realized that actually they cannot go back to like the Sarit Tanarat's time or Pibun's time of like 100% maximum government. Okay, they have to infuse some semblance of like democracy inside. Okay, so that's why we call it a managed democracy. Okay, why is that so? Because we have like student protests, okay, and the businessmen, the business class has also become more and more prominent. So therefore, there are a lot of like civilian factions that the military and the monarchy cannot ignore anymore. Okay, so that's why they have to like give some face, all right, and definitely accommodate their demands. Okay, so that's why they developed this hybrid called managed democracy. So in Thailand, okay, that's what I always say, same but different. So therefore we will see so how would that be encapsulated, all right, in this PRAMS managed democracy. So let's look at whether this managed democracy, right, was able to maintain political stability using criterion 2. So again, they have yet another constitution. Actually, you don't need to like remember how many constitutions there were okay, because I also don't know too many already. Okay, so just remember, if you choose that particular case study, like for example Sarit's case study, or Prem's case study, then just know what has changed for that particular case study. Okay, don't have to compare the whole for the whole period in the post-war period. Okay, so new constitution to safeguard the interests of the military and the bureaucratic elite, okay, the civil servants basically, while allowing for businesses to be represented, and the military and the bureaucracy was still very much in control. There's some semblance of democracy, like there's an elected House of Representatives, okay, but then it was checked by the Senate. So the House of Representatives would be like the lower house, checked by the Senate, the upper house, and the upper house was mostly appointed, so they are not elected. Okay, so that's not like democracy. So that's why it's a managed democracy. Okay, but on the other hand, there's still some concessions. They allowed student and labor groups to function. Okay, and there was like free press. Okay, and then at the same time, okay, there are also some limitations with regards to PRAM's managed democracy. Mostly it's their own problem, internal problems. So factionalism in the military, right, the infighting, right, continued to become a serious problem. All right, so therefore there's this very famous example called the Young Turks faction. All right, they led a coup in 1981 against the PRAM government. Okay, however, General PRAM established a counter coup headquarters. Okay, and General PRAM actually had the royal family accompany him, okay, in this headquarters in Korat, okay. And then General Prem made repeated broadcasts that the royal family was safe with him. Okay, so basically this shows that the royal family has put their faith or has put their blessings, all right, on Prem. Okay, and this confirmed that the monarchy was the most significant political structure in Thailand actually. Okay, so like the biggest winner of all these, right, is the king himself. Okay, so because basically the king would be like the kingmaker or so called. All right, so like basically anyone who wants to become prime minister of Thailand, right, he has to receive the support of the king. So it's kind of like unspoken rule. Okay, then it's only after they have like been anointed by the king, okay, would they be like given full legitimacy and recognition, okay, as a prime minister. Right, so therefore it's still very much tumultuous, it's still very destabilizing, okay, and the impact on democracy was that on one hand there are some concessions, but on the other hand still very restrictive, stuff like that. Okay, so therefore it's still a lot of like give and take, a double-edged sword kind of thing. All right, the military continued to be very important. Okay, the military was to play the role of the role of the guardian of Thai democracy. So that's strange, right? Okay, it's like yeah it doesn't sound logical. Okay, but there we go. Okay, it was in order, so it must be correct, right? However, in spite of it all, generally Thai politics became stabilized, all right, and therefore there was basically a long period of like undisputed parliament. So there were like no coups no like step elections and all that. Okay, so actually this period is overall a positive case study because no protests. Okay, there's no like infighting or like successful coups. Okay, so let's find out a little bit more about General Prem. Okay, so therefore this suggests that General Prem, right, even after he has stepped down as Prime Minister, he was still very, very influential, simply because of his very close ties to the king. Okay, all right. So who was General Prem? Yeah. So basically, uh, in his position as a very close ally of the king, right, he was able to have a lot of power. Okay, and but he kind of used his power to put this power to good use. All right. Because eventually his government was also one where that brought about stability. Okay, yeah, he managed to try to escape the coup or survive the coup attempts. Okay, and basically managed to like try to not let the infighting lead to the demise of his government. Okay, right. Well, his government also had certain limitations or certain challenges. Right, one very important challenge, right, was the emerging business community. So we're still looking at the business community still becoming involved in politics. All right, so we can see that during this period of managed democracy, where they allowed like some form of like political opposition, right, the business community tried to influence politics by sponsoring three parties. Okay, so therefore we have these three parties, and this saw the rise of what is termed as a money politics. Okay, and this would be the evidence of the growing influence of business community in politics. So therefore it's like, yes, we still have like so-called like growing democracy, but this democracy, or so-called democratic power, okay, seem to be dictated by the business class. All right, so therefore again, to what extent that did it like influence or benefit the masses, right, which is like the regular folk, is still up to debate. Okay, so it's like we do see there are a lot of challenges. Okay, there are a lot of like different like factions and different power bases. Okay, in Thailand. Okay, at the end of it all, it requires a very strong leader. Okay, for him to be able to balance all these different factions. Okay, in order to promote political stability. All right. Eventually, General Prem will be kind of like have to step down. All right, because he lost the 1988 elections to General Chat Chai. Okay, so again, another general surprise, surprise. A lot of reason why he lost his election, right, can also be attributed to the rise of the money politics. Okay, or the growing influence of the businessman. Okay, in politics as well. Okay, because this General Chat Chai, right, we also know more about him next year. Okay, he was also like very pro business. So like basically it was like what the business class wanted, the business community wanted. Okay, because of the pro business inclinations of General Chap Chai, and therefore rising allegations of corruption and all that, right? It would lead to a lot of resentment and dissatisfaction against Chap Chai. Okay, culminating in a 1991 coup. Okay, another coup, yet another coup by yet another general, right? At that point in time, after the 1991 coup, the army promised that they will hold elections and eventually they will return to parliamentary government. Okay, however, okay, General Suchinda later said that he will become prime minister the next year. Okay, even though there were no elections and he did not stand for any election, so therefore he just, own self declare prime minister, and that obviously wasn't, an example of democracy, right? So therefore, the people began to feel the military's intention to hold on to power because there's something that they were very familiar with. Okay, the military is definitely very clear in their intentions, and the people are not stupid. Okay, and this led to widespread pro-democracy protests in Bangkok. So therefore, we still have a lot of instability. Okay, and these protests were led by Chamlong Stimrang, a former Bangkok governor. So we have like different factions again, right? And therefore it like led to outbreak of violence, okay, and instability on the streets. Okay, and then the army became involved, the government responded. It was like a military solution. The army fired on the demonstrators, and now the hero came. Okay, okay, and therefore the king put an end to this confrontation in this very, very iconic moment. Okay, so I was obviously alive at that point in time, and I remember actually watching this on TV. Okay, and it left a very strong impression on me. Okay, because these are actually clear, political leaders. Okay, and the position of like absolute subservience to the king. Okay, because they're basically prostrating, all right, in front of the king. Okay, this suggests the kind of power the king has. Okay, and how the king admonished them. All right, like, father admonishing the children, and they're like, spoiled children, young kids, kind of thing. Okay, so therefore this really tells you the immense absolute influence of the king. So even though, the king was not like, prime minister or president, right, but actually the power that the king has, right, is more than that. Okay, so the only video I can find is in French, all right, but actually it's better because you cannot really hear, don't understand the French narrator, doesn't matter because the subtitles are actually easier to follow. Okay, so let's take a look at that.
Comme de mauvais élèves, à genoux devant le roi Bhumibol, le général Suchinda Kraprayun, devenu la bête noire de la rue, suivi de celui qui voulait le renverser, le général Chamlong Srimuang, tout juste sorti de prison. Entre ces deux hommes, sermonnés par leur souverain, il y a au moins 40 morts et 600 blessés, après 4 jours et 4 nuits d'émeutes à Bangkok. C'est la deuxième fois en 46 ans de règne que le roi Bhumibol intervient directement dans les affaires de son pays. La dernière fois, en 73, il y avait eu 100 morts. Le Premier ministre et l'opposant ont dû, répondant à la volonté royale, faire amende honorable ensemble et publiquement. Le grand perdant semble le Premier ministre, puisqu'il accepte des réformes constitutionnelles qui entraîneront sans doute son remplacement par un élu. Mais l'opposant, lui, s'engage à renoncer aux manifestations pour porter le débat à l'Assemblée nationale où seront discutées ces réformes. Pourtant, autour du monument de la démocratie, on manifeste toujours pour rendre hommage à ceux qui sont tombés sous les balles. Grâce à l'arbitrage royal, le Premier ministre a pour l'instant sauvé la face, mais la rue n'est pas près d'oublier la répression.
All right, so again, a key moment, okay, of the king's intervention, okay, which marked an end to this instability. All right, so let's look at what came after this king intervention. So did the king intervention, right, bring about stability? Okay, let's find out. Right, so in the aftermath, there was a temporary interim prime minister, and finally free and fair elections were held, and Chua Nit Pai attained power. So take note, this is a Democratic Party, right? Just now, earlier on, we said that this Democratic Party was like sponsored by the business community, right? So again, you can expect that this Democratic Party would be like pro-business, right? But never mind, at least he was democratically elected, so it's still democracy. Okay, so the resolution of this the face-off, okay, was significant for a few reasons. So yeah, the scene that you have just seen, right, is actually very, very famous. Okay, kind of iconic, right, and it kind of symbolically represented the role that the monarchy could play in Thailand, right, and so therefore the monarchy could be seen as a stabilizing force against the excesses of the military, right, and then from then on, okay, so definitely post 1992 period is a relative democratic period, okay, because of the context, right, because of the middle class, they have become a lot more vocal, okay, and they have a lot of experience of protest, right. So if you're not happy, they have no qualms about going to the streets and having mass demonstrations, right? And so therefore the military cannot do that funny thing about trying to like change the constitution if as and when they like it anymore. Okay, because the middle class, all right, they being very vocal and being very politicized, they will definitely voice their opinions, and they will not go unchallenged, right? So definitely the government have to take into consideration mass political participation. Okay, but did Thailand experience stability henceforth? Um, Actually, not really, right? So you will see, okay, that yes, after this 1992 crisis, okay, they seem to be okay. They're going to live happy ever after. They're going to have a democratic government. However, this promise dissipated, okay, because the people in power, they continue to prioritize their own interests more. Like for example, the business class, okay, the elite, the military. Okay, so therefore the pressure for reform faded, right? And the Thai middle class and the businessmen themselves, they also lost interest in wanting to make Thailand become more democratic. Okay, so therefore, as a result, okay, this so-called like post 1992 democratic government, right? It was actually quite unstable, okay, because there was a lot of change of government, right? Even though yes, there were some political reforms, like for example, they have yet another 1997 constitution, but actually this one, right, is actually a good one, right? Because this was a result of many public feedback sessions. So it was not something that is like unilaterally changed by the military for their own purpose. Okay. So it's a people's constitution, right? So the things that the reforms that they try to introduce or something that will attempt to like promote democracy. And then they also have this a lot of like create new structures, a lot of processes, okay, to provide checks and balance on corruption, right? And then definitely the military's political influence also declined. Okay, so basically the post 1992 period is kind of like mixed record, so got good and bad things okay, on whether they have promoted political stability. Okay, so politics in Thailand, in conclusion, okay, tended to be a top-down process, right? So therefore, it started out being, very much dominated by the elite. Okay, it was only until the 1970s where the Thai people began to make their voices heard. Okay, and even then, the elite still continued to like hold sway over them, as you can see. All right, so I'm showing this to you again. Okay, you should actually read through them. All right, and if you can write down, copy them down in your lecture notes. Okay, because this will be like the summary. Right, like for example, usually I want to use people's government. So please take a look at this and then see what you want to focus on lah. All right, for you to demonstrate that it is an example of instability. All right, or it's a negative example of maximum government. Okay, so this is Sarit's government. Okay, so it's a positive case study. So what were his strategies, right? What was the evidence of success, for example? Okay, so this is Prem's government, so it's a mixed example. Okay, so there's good and bad stuff, so it's like balance kind of thing. So when you talk about Prem's case, if you want to use Prem as a case study, right, you need to have like a balanced approach, right? So same thing goes for the post 1992 democratic government. Okay, but actually to tell the truth, I think like most of the time students will just use Sarit's government if you don't use Thailand as a case study, because of the fact that it's actually quite complicated. Okay, to talk about managed democracy, to talk about post 1992 democratic government. Okay, so that's why students tend to only focus on Sarit. Okay, finally we're done for lecture 5. Yay! I thought that you'll never be done. Okay, so subsequently, right, for the lectures ahead, all right, I'll just be focusing on like question types or looking at different questions that can be asked for lecture 5. Okay,